Hey, the old man again on the old soapbox. Responding to what a friend of mine posted on Facebook just a little while ago. She said she was had been driving and she got to thinking about all the mass shootings that have been going on in the country the past several years. And wondering what is the cause of that. And she posted something very interesting, and that was the people who grew up during the time frame of the 1940s to the 1980s. We did not, for the most part, experience that. And I'm not saying nothing ever happened, but I know in my school no one would ever shut up. There might have been some isolated incidents, but for the most part, we did not have, and I do not recall ever hearing on the news about these kind of occurrences happening. And she, like I said, she wondered why this is. And I got to thinking that those of us who grew up during that time period that she mentioned, we grew up in a time when, number one, we were taught about the love of our country and why we should love our country. That's not a thing you have to agree everything that goes on with government. That's a different thing. The government's different than the country itself. But we were taught to love our country and to appreciate the sacrifices that were made by our brave men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice so we could live the way we do today. The other thing was that we were taught to respect authority, which meant parents, teachers, law enforcement. We were taught that these people are here to help us, to guide us. Doesn't mean you necessarily agreed with them, but you knew that they were doing what was best for you. The thing was that I remember growing up and we didn't always have everything that we wanted, but we had everything that we needed. And we were happy. I knew that people who had less than us, and I knew people who had more than us. And I think where it all started going south is, and I blame my generation. Not everyone in my generation, but there's some people in my generation because we grew up in a time when parents were strict. And unless you lived in the city, you might not have experienced it. But if you lived in even the suburbs or out in the country, if you did something wrong, you either got the belt, or if you were really out in the country, the switch. And you've never experienced it having to go out to a bush and pick the twig that they're going to use to spank you with. And you better bring the right kind, because if you bring something flimsy and it breaks, they're going to go get something more substantial. Nowadays they would call that child abuse. But if we ever got those things, it's because we deserved it and we knew it. Uh, like I said, I blame my generation because where it started, because there's at that point you had people who said that when they have kids, they're not going to be as strict as their parents were. They're going to be friends with their kids, which is the worst thing to do. It is not your job as a parent to be friends with your kids. It's not your job to get them to like you. You're a kid. They should be liking you. If they don't, then something's wrong. It's not you, it's the kid. Because unfortunately, there are some kids, you can give them everything and they still turn out to be monsters. Look at the Menendez brothers. But for the most part, you had discipline, which discipline is not a bad thing. I mean, if you've ever been in the military, you know about discipline. Especially in the Marine Corps, you were taught discipline. And you're taught things for a reason. They teach you how to do things a certain way for a reason, not just in the military, but your parents. Everything they do for a reason. And they do this stuff out of love for you. And so when you look through that time of the 40s and through the 80s, you had groups there were schools who had rifle shooting teams. I think I mentioned before in another video that I had that growing up in the country as we did, in the school where we went to, you had our farm kids. And they would come to school every morning in their pickup trucks with their rifles in their rifle rack. No one was ever shot. These same farm kids would have a little scabbard on their belt, which held their little pocket knife. No one was ever stabbed. You might have an occasional fist fight break out, but that was it. I mean, I had an incident in high school where a bully, he tried to pick a fight with me. And it's one of those things where he said, well, you can meet me after school by the school buses. Okay. I did, and he didn't. And the next day, when he tried to talk trash about it in front of his friends, I just told him, I said, look, I was there. Where were you? And they quickly looked at him and was like, what? So you can't back down, but at the same time, I mean, when I grew up and during the time frame that was mentioned, there was a lot of times people would get in fights, and by the time the fight was over, they respected each other and they became friends. Nowadays, they just want to kill you. And the other issue is there's more of a mental component now. I don't know why, but for the people to do these, a lot of times it's kids who are killing fellow kids. And sometimes, in some instances, you got adults who are shooting at anybody. But the reason why is there something mentally wrong, and no amount of gun laws are going to be able to fix the situation. You say, well, anybody under 18 should not have a gun. You know, especially out in the country, you got fathers who are taking their sons out hunting, and they generally teach them about firearm safety and all this stuff, respect for the gun, and the damage that it can do. And I think that needs to be taught to everyone, even if you don't own a gun or you don't want to have a gun. I think it's important to know how to handle one, because you never know when a situation arises. If it's a matter of defending yourself or even defending your loved one, you should be able to know how to handle a firearm. So education, I think, is a factor as well. But like I said, going back to the mental component, is that when people say that people under 18 should not have a gun, you get people now who can, at 17, with their parents' signature, can enlist in the military. So at 17 years of old, they are being taught how to use a firearm to stand for our freedom, to fight for us at 17. But yet you're saying at home you cannot own a gun. The gun is a tool just like everything else. You take away the guns of the law-abiding citizens, and only criminals will have guns. But this isn't just this rant I'm going on right now. It has nothing to do with NRA or Second Amendment or anything. It's about why has this started now? And like I said, number one, we are not teaching our children about respect for authority anymore. We're not teaching them firearm safety. We are now testing our kids. I think every year when kids are in school, they should be giving tests about mental aptitude. If you see that little Billy or little Susie or whatever is real quiet, and that child is always real quiet, you might want to do some investigating to see what their home life is like, what their friends are like, if they have friends. You need to see what is wrong. And sometimes, oh, well, that's how they always are, they're always quiet. But the problem with that is that you don't know what's going on inside their heads. And even as children, they can get some pretty dark thoughts if they're left alone by themselves, if they are not nurtured in the proper way. We need to be doing everything we can to nurture our children so that they grow up and become well-rounded adults. So that is my opinion about why all these shootings had happened. I remember in 1999, I was 38 years old. I had been out of the military for a couple of years, and I was given a chance to go back to school. And in my freshman English class, I was attending school at Tennessee State University, which is a historic black university before it became a state school. And it's important to realize that because my professor was a civil rights activist back in the 60s, and she did all the sit-ins in Nashville and everything. And she told us about all this stuff. So whenever something big in the news would come about, we would discuss it because what's going on now in future history. So probably one of the most known shootings at the time was Columbine. And we were talking about it. And I remember raising my hand and I asked the professor if she'd like to hear an older person's point of view. And she just smiled and said, go ahead. And I said, well, number one, I think kids today have too much. Which is in the early 80s, you had the home computers coming out, and there was no such thing as cell phones. You had normally one phone. If you're lucky, you had two phones, maybe one in the bedroom, your parents' bedroom, one in the kitchen. So you didn't have stuff like cell phones or anything. Growing up, I had a turntable and a clock radio. I had nothing fancy. And after I got out of high school, I know friends and I would go sometimes once a week after I got paid from a job out of that. We'd go to the video arcade. And it was different into what it progressed into, which was, a few years down the road, you had companies like Atari, Nintendo's bringing up where people had video gaming systems at home. And there's a few, and then just like movies and television and music, you had video games came out which were extremely violent. And I'm not putting this off on the video games, I'm not putting it on movies or whatever, but as parents, it's important to know what's right to let your child do and what's not. And if you think it's okay for your child to be playing these shoot 'em up games on the computer all day, it's one thing if, you decide as a parent, okay, you have 2 hours that you can play on your computer. After that, you're going to go inside. You're going to go outside and play and do whatever. I mean, because that's what we had. We played outside most of the time. The only time we didn't do that was if it was raining or it was bad weather. So all these things add up. And so you get these people who are quiet and withdrawn. They have these dark ideas coming in their heads. And maybe the other kids pick on them for whatever reason. And so they're not getting positive attention. So they decide to go and get attention another way, which is by bringing in a gun and shooting your classmates, which, like I said, I cannot even think about doing that. So I don't understand how these kids, for the most part, why do I think it's a good idea? And of course, some people say, well, you need to arm the teachers. Well, I don't know if you have to arm the teachers, but most schools nowadays, I mean, we never had this as kids, but most schools nowadays have these magnetic doors where they're opened at a certain time when the kids come in. And then after that, if someone is trying to get in, they have to buzz a buzzer, and then the office lets them in. And generally, they normally have to sign in once they get to the office if they're not a student. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately, a lot of schools right now, they have metal detectors and all kinds of things. And I hate this because it wasn't like this when we were kids. But a lot of schools have resource officers, basically a police officer who is stationed inside the school. So when I hear about these instances where kids are doing this, it's like, well, my first thought is, how did they get in with that? How is it not detected? And I think that is what we need to concentrate on now. So, as Barney Fife would say, we could nip it in the bud, and before anything happens. And if we can catch these kids before anything happens, then maybe we can get them the help that they need. This shouldn't just be about taking away firearms or trying to do away with the Second Amendment. No, it's not that. This is about the welfare of not just our children, but every citizen of the United States of America. We got people out there who are hurting in ways which we could not even begin to understand. And it seems like the only way they know how to draw attention to themselves is by getting a rifle or a shotgun or whatever and coming into the school or place of business and opening fire. We need to try to stop this before it happens. So if you know someone at work and they were always outgoing and something, all of a sudden they're acting different, they're more withdrawn, or their humor is more of a mean streak to it now. They start bringing up things that you would never expect them to talk about. If you see this, you need to report this to somebody and help this person get the help they need. That was why I initially, when I got my degree in education, I went for early childhood education, which my idea was that if I could get these young children and help put them on the right path when they're young, then hopefully they won't be doing some of the things you hear about some of these kids doing as they get older. I did find out for my own sake is that I actually have more patience with the older kids. And you can't just write them off just because they're older. And you can have kids who are doing real well when they're young, and then something happens as they get older, and all of a sudden they just start slip sliding away. So it's up to us, our older generations, to guide our younger generation to make them responsible adults, well-rounded, responsible adults who can function in the society that we live. And like I said, I think we need to go back to the basics of discipline. I mean, we still had, growing up in Pennsylvania, we still had what they used to call corporal punishment in school, which was spanking. I never saw it in the elementary school I went to. The only time I saw it was in junior high school. And I've seen a couple kids get that, but it was not something that happened every day, because from what I could see, most of the people I went to school with were pretty good kids. I mean, occasionally everyone would slip up. I mean, when I was in school, I had detention once, and that was because in 7th grade, the reading teacher who I had everybody loved her. She was a great woman, but she was pregnant, and she left about halfway through the semester because she had to give birth. Well, the substitute that came in, she was more of a strict type person. And so I didn't get my book report turned into her in time, so she gave me detention. So even I got detention once. But like I said, I'm going around in circles. I know I am, but to get back on topic here, we need to teach our kids discipline. We need to teach them respect for authority. We need to teach them there are consequences for doing what is wrong. We also need to be on the lookout that anything is wrong with the child. There may be something that's happening in home life, or maybe it's happening in the school, something that might be distressing the child and putting pressure on the child in an unhealthy way. If we can do these things, and like I said, backtrack. The other thing I said was teach the children today about firearm safety. And you don't even have to have a gun, bring a gun in school to teach them that. Teach them not to be afraid of a firearm. The only time they should be afraid of a firearm is if they see one pointed at them. So before I start going around in circles again, I'm going to end it right here. But generally, this is how I see it. How we can stop this threat of violence. So in closing, I'm just going to say, be good to one another. If you see someone who is down, help them if you can. And sometimes that help might be just a kind word. You don't know how well a thank you or a job well done might affect a person's day. So on that note, have a good one.